Major scales are a waste of time. Later in this video, I'm gonna give you 3 ways to fix that. I always hated scales. It was the one thing that every piano teacher made me do over and over again, and I could never figure out why. And you may be thinking to yourself, hey, I hate doing these things in every lesson too. Feels like the teacher's just using up the 10 minutes it's gonna take me to play all these things correctly just so that they have to think up less shit to say to me, and besides, when am I ever gonna use this in real life?
Well, as a seasoned professional pianist with my fair share of performance credentials, let me be the first to tell you, you're completely right.
Literally the only point of learning major scales is to prove to some arbitrary authority that you know how to do them. And I am not one to accept some arbitrary authority. Look, it is a basic building block of music theory, and it's something that we actually do cover in our Intro to Piano and Intro to Theory courses, which right now you can get our entire course library for 99 bucks, but only for the next 5 days. But even though we include them, the reality is everyone hates major scales. I think I can count on one hand the number of times you actually find major scales out in the wild, unless you're playing like Mozart or something. But generally speaking, major scales just don't show up in music. And think about how stupid it would be if they did. So why then are they the most assigned exercise of all time when it comes to piano lessons? What makes them so valuable that we have to practice them over and over and over again, driving yourselves nuts because B and G flat and D flat all look so f***ing similar? So this one time I was doing NYSSMA, which is New York State's student music adjudication thing that you do every year if you're a nerd like me. Also, you're welcome, New York kids, for that little PTSD memory. I had to write down the 3 scales that I'd like the judge to pick from as a test of my invaluable knowledge of the sacred major scale. I had circled C and G like any sensible young pianist who's not out of my f***ing mind. And in deciding on a 3rd, my wonderful mother suggested E because, well, that's super easy on the flute, and besides, what are the odds that he's gonna call it anyways?
E.
So what are they useful for? I mean, is there a reason that they are the most basic and fundamental piano exercise of all time? What am I missing here? Turns out it's all about learning keys, and more specifically, key shapes. Look, every key has a shape. We have C here, we have E here, thanks mom. We have G flat. When you play the major scale, you have to navigate that shape, and once you do it enough, you kind of have an understanding of the shape of that key to the point where you can play something in it. Except you don't. Look, keys are annoying. They have a ton of accidentals and key signatures to remember and decipher, and then you have to work them out on the instrument itself. I get that it's useful to paint a rough picture of what you might encounter in a given key, except for the fact that you'll almost never encounter this in its perfect form. You wanna know what's way more important than the major scale itself? The major scale formula. Ah, they didn't teach you that one, did they? Okay, well, maybe they did for all of you, and they just left that one out for me, and then I never understood the concept of intervals, and then everybody laughed. It can be confusing to connect the dots that these 2 things and are exactly the same thing, just starting from different points. Start on any note, go up a whole step, go up another whole step, go up a half step, and now go 3 more whole steps. And then finally, 1 half step. Bam, major scale. Do that anywhere else. Whole, half, whole, half. Done. Let's take it 1 step further. Numbers. Forget note names. Those are dumb. This is no longer C. It's 1. And this is no longer F. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. Fill in the blanks. You want to know how this becomes really useful? Watch this. Hey Charles, what are the chord changes to Let It Be?
Sure thing, that's 1, 5, 6, 4.
Cool. What are the chord changes to John Coltrane's version of My Favorite Thing?
I have no f***ing idea.
That number system is based on the major scale. And so the shape of the scale is very important to understand if you want to open up all kinds of ability to play just about anything. Chord progressions are described using the major scale. Melodies are described using the major scale. Building chords is described using the major scale. Look, a regular old triad is built using 1, 3, and 5 from the major scale. This stupid f***ing chord is built using 1, 3, 5, flat 7, flat 9, 10, sharp 11, 13, sharp 15. Actually, that sounds kind of sick. All of these things require that you understand the major scale so that you can understand the major scale formula, so that you can understand the number system, so that you can actually participate in conversations about music. Basically, major scales are useless without more context. They're only useful when they're actually being applied to something, which begs the question, why do we just play them up and down in a way that you're almost guaranteed to never actually find in real music? Technique. Technique is the reason that every piano teacher on the face of the planet makes you play scales. But wait, how is that technique useful if we know that we're never going to encounter just the scale by itself in actual music? That's a great question. What the scales can teach you is important, but there are so many other ways to apply them in ways that will actually be useful in developing your technique. And here's just a few. Contrary motion is a method of playing scales that doesn't allow you to just rely on the 2 hands playing an identical thing at the same time. You now have to make your brain work in order to think of the scale in one direction in one hand and in the opposite direction in the other hand. And it's more useful too because unless you're Oscar Peterson, how often are you going to be ripping out lines that are identical between 2 hands anyways? Let alone just playing the scale. This is definitely way trickier and more useful later on. And it's straightforward enough in the key of C when you don't have to deal with any sharps or flats, but it very quickly gets interesting the deeper we go. Another way to make major scales more interesting is to play them in what's called offset parallel motion. Now that's just a fancy way of saying we're playing the major scale, but instead of starting together, you're gonna wait in one hand. That way you're not playing the scales exactly together at the same time. This makes you think a lot harder, and your hands will be doing different fingerings at different times. So you can't just go on major scale autopilot and put your teacher to sleep. Offset parallel motion gives you tons of opportunities to really put your skills to the test. And yes, we're still utilizing the major scale, but the practice here becomes much less about just playing the scales and much more about what playing the scales in this format can do for you. It's developing hand independence, and it's continuing to ingrain the shapes of these keys. You still can't rely on autopilot. And perhaps the most useful thing about this approach is that it's incredibly diverse in terms of variations. You could do them in thirds. You could do them in fourths. You can start either hand from any degree of the major scale, and it will create an entirely different exercise requiring your extreme focus and attention. These are all great options to make scales way more useful and interesting, but they all still involve playing the major scale up and down just purely as the scale itself, which is the whole thing that we brought up in the beginning about it not really being applicable to everyday use. So what else can we do with the major scale that might be a lot more applicable? Melodies typically aren't just scales. They jump around, they make musical statements. So why shouldn't our exercises in the major scale follow that concept? Most pianists are familiar with the Hanon exercises. Almost everyone has heard this. But have you ever heard this one? Or how about this one? Hanon exercises are great because they do a ton for developing our technique, and they also help us understand the shapes of these scales. They actually give us a useful way to utilize the notes of these scales without just playing them up and down. Not only that, but when you start to translate these exercises into multiple keys, they become incredible resources for really truly understanding the shapes of the different major scales, which, as we know, is incredibly important for developing an understanding and an ability to communicate musical ideas. The Hanon exercises are quite literally tongue twisters for your fingers. They're intended to capitalize on the weakest connection points from finger to finger and give us an opportunity to strengthen those connections. Like, check this out. You know how many tries it took me to get that right? And all it is just the notes from the C major scale. That's it. Okay, so major scales are a waste of time, right? Well, they can be. If not applied to something that's actually going to be useful, then the argument can definitely be made that we're just practicing some pointless motion to satisfy some pointless requirement on some pointless test that's never going to apply in real life and never going to actually be useful in an actual career. And come to find out, on-the-job training, they pretty much just start you from scratch anyway, so now you're wondering why you spent $100,000 on a college education just to get some meaningless piece of paper that proves to suck. It's not that the understanding of what a major scale isn't important. It's not even that you should never do that. But if you don't find ways to incorporate that basic understanding into something that will actually help you navigate and start to understand music more thoroughly, you'll find yourself just playing major scales up and down for seemingly no reason, trying to figure out why F looks so simple, but it's so weird to play. The fourth finger twice? I don't get it. It's all about applying these basic concepts in music theory in ways that are actually going to help you learn how to play the things that you want to play. And right now we are actually running our biggest sale ever, but only for the next 5 days. You can get access to our entire library of courses for just $99. But that's only today through Friday. So be sure to check out the link below. And if you've ever wanted to learn how to play piano, this is the best place to start. We start you out with an intro to piano. That'll take you from never having played before to having a basic understanding of the instrument. And from there, we just start building. We go to Intro to Music Theory. We're gonna give you all the basic building blocks of music that you'll need in your journey in learning how to play anything you want. Our Intro to Improv course will get you improvising and playing things right off the top of your head. And then we can add even more context to that and give you more options of things to play with our Making Sense of Modes course. And then my professor from when I was in school, David De Jesus, comes in to teach 2 other courses that are incredibly valuable: Harmony 101 and the Improv Obstacle course. Both of those will put your skills to the test. And they're both taught by the director of jazz studies at Purchase College, which is where I went to school. Once again, it's just $99 for the entire library, and you can access it all at the link below only through March 31st. Be sure to take advantage of that while you can. And guys, that's the best way that you can support the channel so that we can continue doing what we love to do, which is creating this content for you guys. So thank you so much for your support. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video, and we will see you in the next one.